So COP26 is a really crucial time to move from ambition and targets into actually how are we going to deliver this. This is the decade of delivery. We've absolutely got to see concrete plans into action. The key things for us at WWF and for many other organisations and many other people around the world is about ensuring that the actions decided by nations at COP26 in Glasgow this November keep world warming below 1.5 degrees. Now that is the level at which science is telling us we're going to very quickly start to see kind of catastrophic events after that. So it's absolutely vital that the emissions reductions that are put forward by primarily industrialised nations, so that's big nations like the UK, the US, that kind of thing, that those pledges are put into action. It's about going as ambitious as we can and getting those emissions down as quickly as we can in the right way, So that's really very important. 1.5 is absolutely the number, the magic number here. The other thing that we want to see a bit more happening at COP is an understanding that nature is really crucial to this. Nature is part of the solution. If you look at, even just in Scotland, for example, our peatlands store so much carbon. And if we start to see those get degraded, they're actually putting carbon out into the atmosphere instead of storing it up. So that's where we think there's actually tons of potential in making sure that we're protecting key carbon stores like that, like peatlands, like the ocean, in fact, that store carbon, making sure that we're protecting those, and we're seeing actually the links between the climate crisis and the nature crisis. We've got to solve those hand in hand.
Amazing, thank you so much. I really like that point about the link and how it's about taking action rather than just talking. The talking's kind of over. That's what I am excited for at COP26.
It's a really good question. So I don't think I could do the job that I do if I wasn't an eternal optimist. I think it's really important that we look at some of the gains that we've had over the last few years, certainly. There has been some really interesting stuff happening. We've seen nations, including Scotland, declaring climate emergency in their parliaments. I mean, that is amazing. When I started doing this 15 years ago or something, we would never have dreamed that we would see the First Minister stand up in the Scottish Parliament and say, this is a climate emergency. That's amazing. And I think as well there's been some really interesting developments here in Scotland that show that progress can be made, we can do it. So for example, if you look at the example of renewable energy, Scotland now delivers something like 96% of all our electricity demand from renewables. Now that is amazing. We've changed that in a number of years to be almost 100% renewables. So that's a really great example that other small nations could be looking at and say, is this something that we could be doing? So there's a really important kind of conversation to be had about, even though Scotland's not the biggest, we're not even party to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, but we've got tons that we could be doing to help show what is possible. We've got so much renewable energy potential here in Scotland. We've got so much, such a history of innovation. We've got, young people across the nation who are saying this has got to change. We've got tons of potential here in Scotland. So I think there's definitely reason to be optimistic about how Scotland can help to lead the way and work with other small nations and other non-state actors, as they call them, to lead a change. To do something quite ambitious and to do what's really needed. So I take optimism from those kinds of things, the wins that we see, that are not necessarily, the biggest outcomes, but they are reasons for hope. Yeah. And I think that as we go across the next 2 weeks at COP, there are definitely reasons to be optimistic. There are certainly reasons to be angry and reasons to be, pushing harder. But I also think there's definitely, if we look properly for them, there are definitely reasons to be hopeful about what's going to be achieved here. And there's no other choice. We have to do it. We have to do it here at COP in Glasgow.
100%.
I think that's really amazing how you've been able to see how Scotland, although we are a small nation, that there's lots of things that we can do, maybe changing some things that would maybe be negatives into looking at them in a positive light instead. Definitely.
Yeah.
It's very hopeful, it's very inspiring, because it's very easy to look at us and go, we can't do anything, so I'll just not try, but that's not true. Every little helps, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to do a massive name drop here, sorry. I just come from an event that the First Minister was speaking at, and something that she said actually just really sat with me in a way that I was like, yeah, that is important. And she was saying, do you know, we might not have the biggest budgets, but the way that we use them sends a message to other countries.
Yes.
And if we decide actually we're going to use some of our budget for this or that on the climate action kind of work, then we're sending a message to other nations that it's possible to do, and you know, and we're doing it. But the other thing that she said that I thought was kind of the other side of the coin to that is that at the moment it's fairly easy for Scotland to be seen as a world leader on climate because the bar is low, and that was the First Minister's words, the bar is low. So her words on that have really stuck with me this morning, because I think that's absolutely right. Like, you know, we are doing some really great stuff, but let's keep going, let's keep doing more.
Yeah, I think raising the bar is important. It will not only be able to help us within our lives, but generations from now, and not only here, but potentially with what Scotland's doing, it might encourage other countries to do the same thing.
If we can prove that we can do it as such a small country that we are, I think that then it can then gradually transcend to much bigger countries being able to do it.
COP being here just highlights that.
Absolutely.
Indeed. So WWF is quite often immediately associated with species conservation, that kind of thing. But WWF is about people and nature. We work exceptionally closely with communities around the world, to learn from them, to make sure that everything that we're doing in conservation areas, is with their consent, is with their engagement. That's really core to what WWF's all about. So I think if you were to ask me what our kind of biggest concerns were about the impacts of climate change that we're seeing, the first one I would say would actually be about people. We already can see the impacts of climate change manifesting in the kind of most vulnerable parts of the world. So in continents like Africa, Latin America, we're already seeing increasingly unpredictable, increasingly severe weather patterns, which can be leading to floods, droughts, increasingly violent hurricanes and typhoons, these kinds of things. And of course that has a massive impact on things like crop yield, food production. So if you're looking at countries where the vast majority of people depend on small-scale agriculture for their food to survive, then they really are very much at risk. And we're already seeing, for example, in Madagascar, what the world is calling the world's first climate food shortages. So that's very real, and that's happening already. And then on the nature side, we obviously immediately associate polar bears and those kind of polar species with climate change. But we're also looking at something like, if we allow the world to warm 2 degrees, so that's only 0.5 of a degree above the 1.5 that we're aiming for, so it's not much beyond, we haven't got much of a window. We could actually see all of our coral reef ecosystems in the world be affected, every single one, 100% of them. And that's worrying for all the species and the nature that live there. It's worrying because quite often coral reefs create barriers to coastal erosion, but also something like 500 million people around the world depend on coral reefs for their livelihoods. So it's massively interconnected. So there's a really big concern for us, not just about the species that will be affected, of course that's a big concern for us, not just for the habitats and ecosystems that will be affected, but also the human beings who live and depend upon healthy relationships with nature. So that's huge, that's very concerning indeed. And I think as well what's being overlooked it's very difficult to ensure that the voices of the most vulnerable people around the world are heard at COP.
That's what we were discussing.
That's what we were discussing
It's really very difficult to make sure that everybody gets a place at the table. So one of the things that WWF is very clear about is that we will make sure that where we possibly can, we will help to use our platform. That, you know, WWF has a massive platform where, you know, we're the world's leading conservation organisation. But to that end, for example, we work really closely with Indigenous groups. For example, there are 2 Indigenous leaders from the Brazilian Amazon with us in our delegation here at COP in Glasgow. So, yeah, it's very important that we are real about what the impacts already are and what they will be if we allow temperature rise to go above 1.5 degrees.
I really like that answer, because you spoke about how you felt the biggest consequence was on people, and then more specifically how certain groups of people are being overlooked, and that was a discussion we had this morning. I actually myself wasn't too aware of that until today, and we were discussing that the First Minister has met with various Indigenous groups. It's about making sure that everyone's voice is heard, because sometimes these people are the ones being most affected by these issues as well. I
think that goes in Scotland as well, because there's definitely, you know, climate impacts here in Scotland already. You know, one example would be agriculture here in Scotland, which is massive. You know, for a massive percentage of the land use in Scotland is for agriculture. And you might remember a couple of years ago when we had the Beast from the East, and we had then a prolonged kind of period where spring was delayed. That came at a cost of not just you know millions of pounds to the economic side, but we also had production of some crops went down by up to 25%. Now that's massive, you know. So we're already seeing reduction in crop yield here in Scotland in some cases, as well as farmers saying that they had you know water shortages, and they were seeing with that kind of prolonged and extreme cold. A lot of livestock losses, particularly baby lambs who were born into the snow, couldn't survive. So even here in Scotland, we're seeing already across, you know, our food systems and our kind of landscapes that climate change is already here.
I feel like that's quite terrifying actually, because when you think about climate change, you think, oh, maybe more like drought and maybe in warmer climates, when some of the things that you were just discussing, like the baby lambs, and the agriculture issues, like you don't actually realise or you don't equate them to climate change actually having an impact in Scotland.
And we're seeing things like wildfires now much more. Like I don't remember ever seeing as much as that. So it's really it's coming into its own now, and we're really, I think for a long time, you know, we kind of had the narrative that climate impacts are coming, but they're here. They're here now.
And I think it's important to move over to that it's here, and that it's not it's coming. It's actually addressing that it is affecting us just now.
Thank you very much for that.
Great question. So WWF is the world's leading global conservation organisation, and as such we have an opportunity to come to COP and be part of the discussions that are happening there. We've got some of the world's best climate scientists working for WWF who have helped advise the UN scientific panels on climate change, and we've also got a huge number of supporters around the world, and that is massive. That's really important, because it's the voices of those people that we exist to kind of try and channel. Our organisation is also about engaging people in climate action. So, for example, we've been campaigning on climate change for a really long time now, and looking to try and influence Scottish Government, UK Government, Welsh Government and internationally on what kind of climate targets are they setting, how are they going to deliver those, when are they going to deliver them by, how are we going to make sure it happens. All of that stuff is really important, and WWF supporters around Scotland help us to kind of hold Scottish Government to account and UK government to account on the promises they make around climate change and ensuring that they deliver them. So that's obviously a really big strand of the work for WWF, is about how do we use our kind of power and influence to influence those who hold the power, essentially.
I think accountability is something really key. We were discussing how in the past that maybe has been an issue with different climate summits and the likes, a lot of talk about issues and then people
not much
don't follow through,
Can you actually do what needs to be done, really, instead of just sitting and just kind of talking about it?
I think it's important to deliver on the promises. Not just, I think you can't just make them, you need to actually put them into place. It's easy to make things, but very, very important to follow through.
And I think the WWF's work in implementing that and kind of acting as a pressure group in that sense is truly essential, because otherwise, if nobody keeps holding these people accountable, I love that word, accountability, it's easier to not do it, so we need to make sure they are.
It's kind of easy for the governments to kind of push it under the rug, pretend it's not happened, but having people continuously go, well, you have said that, you need to deliver on it, it will help them to realise that they do need to do that.
I appreciate what WWF
is
doing about that as well.
It's a very brave thing to do.
Yeah, we don't always get, not everybody always likes it, From my perspective, it's really interesting to hear that from you as young people, what you think matters here, like what you want to see happen and what you think the role of organisations like WWF should be. One of it, again, because I've just come from there, sorry, but another thing the First Minister said this morning was like, every world leader here should be uncomfortable because not one of us is doing enough yet. And for me, I thought that's a really good signal because she's right. And to hear the Scottish Government leader, the First Minister, to say that is, that took me quite aback because she's acknowledging there that actually we've got more to do, and she said as well, like, it's the role of young people, it's the role of NGOs like WWF, it's the role of the public to keep essentially holding their feet to the fire, that they do what they say they're going to do. So I think that's a really important, one of the most important things that organisations like WWF can do is to help the people who support us to start on a kind of climate action journey with us, to help us hold decision makers and leaders accountable for the climate action they need to take. Because she's acknowledging there that actually we've got more to do, and she said as well, like, it's the role of young people, it's the role of NGOs like WWF, it's the role of the public to keep essentially holding their feet to the fire, that they do what they say they're going to do. So I think that's a really important, one of the most important things that organisations like WWF can do is to help the people who support us to start on a kind of climate action journey with us, to help us hold decision makers and leaders accountable for the climate action they need to take.
So relating to your point about always being able to do more, do you feel, what more can the WWF do to fight climate change, and what plans are in place to do so? Sorry.
Good question. Yeah, so internally within WWF, we're a global network, but in our kind of own WWF processes, things, we try our absolute hardest to make sure that we are doing exactly what we should be doing compared to what we're asking others to do. So for example, we have a carbon budget, basically, which means that, like, if you need to travel anywhere, if you need to do anything that's going to create carbon, there is a limit. So it's almost like the same as a financial budget you would have in any kind of department of an organisation or a business, where you say, well, this is how much money we've got to spend, you can't go above that. And that's kind of the thinking that we apply to carbon as well. Like, once we have emitted a certain amount of carbon, we can't go above above that, and we've got some, some really kind of innovative things happening in our offices. So for example, our UK office has won awards for its sustainability. It uses rainwater capture for water for the taps and for flushing the toilets, all these kinds of things. So we try our real best to be upholding the highest possible standards that we can when it comes to sustainability, and making sure that our impact is not a negative one, essentially.
Lisa, do you feel that the WWF is doing the most it could do to fight climate change, or are there any plans to do any more? Obviously, your whole organisation is based on this issue, and I understand that. So,
Yeah.
but are there any plans in the pipeline to really become even more of a world leader in that sense?
Yeah, we're always striving, and we're always looking to learn as well from other organisations about what they're doing. We're also WWF also works very closely with businesses to help try and ensure that they can get the best possible advice from us on how to lessen their impact, whether that's where they source things from, whether it's the type of packaging they might use, anything. But it's looking at actually transforming the way that businesses operate. So yeah, we're always really keen to make sure that we're absolutely pushing the highest possible standards for ourselves, but also then using our expertise to help others, whether that's Tesco's, whether that's lots of kind of big international businesses, because we truly believe that we can't carry on the way that we are now, and if WWF can be helping these massive global businesses to change their operating practices, change the way they source things, see that sustainability is not something that they can decide to do or not to do. It has to be part of the business model, because we can't continue without fundamentally changing the way that we work.
I think that's a really brilliant way to continue to develop the work you're doing, because I think that it's again that kind of thing of when we went back to talking about kind of acting as a pressure group with the government. One voice is good, but like a whole organisation is so much better, and in that same sense, one organisation working towards fighting climate change is brilliant, but that organisation then helping others is really brilliant, and I'm really excited to hear that you've got plans in place to do that. That's really exciting.
I think it's good as well how you're saying that you help businesses but try to become more sustainable, but also WWF is doing the same thing. It's almost a wee bit like practice what you preach.
Yes.
So you're not just saying one thing and doing the complete opposite, you're implementing what you're wanting other businesses to implement as well within WWF. I think that's really important. Yeah,
that really matters to us. And I think as well, like, there's also a kind of flip side to that as well. So when we are kind of encouraging our supporters or others to kind of get involved, we have to recognise that nobody is perfect. Like, there's no person who already has this completely perfect. We all live in the world as it is, but what is going to need is everybody doing their bit imperfectly. We can't wait for everyone to be perfect to start taking action on climate. We've all just got to start from where we're at and do as much as we can ourselves personally in our own lives, as well as making sure that the governments and the multinational businesses and others are doing everything that they must do, because it's got to change.
Yeah, I love the idea that everybody doing it imperfectly works better, because I think it's really hopeful. I think the idea that if you're not 100% perfect, it just puts people off, because with the kind of life I live and the life we as school children live, and I'm sure the same as you're a normal person, you can't be perfect, it's not possible, and it becomes too much hassle, too much stress, too much anxiety.
It almost puts you off.
It does, so the idea of everybody doing a little bit more, I love that. I think that's really hopeful.
That the most powerful tool that any of us have is our voice as citizens. We elect people to parliaments and government. so they work for us essentially, you know. So I think what is going to be absolutely crucial is people speaking up, raising their voices, saying this is what we want to see, this is what we want to hear, this is what's got to happen. That is incredibly powerful. I think that, you know, in recent years, what young people have been doing has really changed the conversation about climate change. And that's unbelievably powerful to see young people standing up and saying, it's not good enough yet, you've not gone far enough yet. And to remind us that, yeah, there's lots of reasons for hope and there's lots of changes that have happened, but there's still more to do. And I think it's incredibly powerful to hear young people standing up and saying, actually, this is what we want to see from you. And we're not going to wait for it. We're not going to accept empty promises. We're not going to accept, yeah, we'll get to it down the line. You know, I think that's amazing. It's amazingly powerful. And while I don't think young people should be put in that position, I think it has been amazing to see that so many folk are now, you know, standing up, getting involved in climate activism, talking to each other, talking to their siblings, their parents, their school friends, their grannies, you know, all these kinds of things. And that is how change happens. That is how change happens.
Yeah. I think that is why the Climate Emergency Newsroom is so important to us. Is it about informing people about climate change, making them aware of things that they can do, just spreading the word rather than just sitting back and staying quiet about it. It's important to get your views across, definitely.
An understanding of it from such a young age, because for kind of like primary school, I think that's when you would, first that's when you would gain an interest for that sort of thing, but also that's the type of age where you can really comprehend that and you can actually start to comprehend. But I think that's really good.
And then I think as well as some primary schoolers are still quite young, if you've always grown up with this understanding, it's more natural to implement it rather than trying to when you're older, and it's maybe something that not a lot of people like change, so it's maybe harder to change the way that you're going about your life, whilst if you've always done it, it's maybe perhaps easier.
Absolutely, because there's probably so many generations above us that just, because climate change it just wasn't an issue when they were growing up, and that's probably a good reason why a lot of the governments and stuff around the world, they don't focus on it and they don't realise as much, as just because it's not been ingrained in them from that young age. It's just not been as big an issue for them. So
I think also it can be quite fun. A lot of things related to climate change for young children can be, you know, I feel, you know, arts and craftsy and recycling projects and these kind of things, and it's very easy to say, of course, that these projects are imperfect and all that, but I think it is what James said about really building the fundamentals of understanding the issue, being engaged in the issue and wanting to change the issue and kind of being taught how, being given the tools, and that's all you can do, you know. And
exactly. If you use like an example like plastic straws, for example, you know, now the ban on plastic straws and the change in kind of attitudes towards that is massively helpful. What a huge impact, you know. But yeah, if you look at it, you know, when I was growing up, we were so wasteful, you know, it was so normal to have plastic straws, to have those cans that, you know, like the wee lid of the can came off and, you know, what's that about? Like, you know, all these kind of just wee things that like just were normal. Now we're growing up in a generation where it's actually like, that isn't normal. That is kind of weird. Like, why are we still doing that kind of stuff? It's wasteful, it's damaging to the environment, those kinds of things. So when you look at an example like that and see, like, actually, that was just a bunch of people who started to question, this is weird, why are we doing this? And it grew and it grew and it grew. And now, you know, you've got nations across the world saying no plastic bags, no plastic straws. Now, that in itself is not going to be the solution to climate change, but it just shows what you can do when people, you know, put their minds to it. And now, I wouldn't dream if, you know, asking for a plastic straw or something. It's just completely changed, hasn't it?
No, it's
So
there's going to be an entire generation of school kids that are going to look at a plastic straw and be, what's that?
So the bags is brilliant as well in Scotland, because it's almost like it's such a small thing, the 5 pence charge. I know it maybe doesn't relate to children as much, but I very rarely see someone with like reusable bags now, because you just don't want to pay the 5 pence for the bag. don't want to do it.
And so, you know, in a very short space of time, a few years really only, that's completely changed in terms of societal attitude. So, you know, somebody who was growing up before that will maybe take a bit longer, but then you guys growing up where like it has just never been normal to just have tons of plastic bags and all of that kind of stuff. It's a shift, isn't it?
Well, I volunteered in a charity shop and someone like handed in, it was like hundreds of books all individually wrapped in these plastic bags, and I'm thinking, oh, like what on earth have they done that for? This is horrible. And I'm thinking I had to sit and rip them all open and just shove them in the bin. I'm thinking, oh, it's just still waste.
That's because it's not normal for you. Because so I think like that's what the importance of working with the primary school children and the lower secondary school
so
children.
They can realise that it's not normal to waste so much stuff.
And I think that's really important. Like young people are going to be so crucial to this, because the decisions that we take now in Scotland and around the world about, you know, how, you know, the decisions the government takes now about how they allocate their budget, how we kind of look at infrastructure, how we shape the society that we live in, is going to be the shape that then young people are going to grow up and find jobs in. And we need to make sure that we are acting now, not just because it's urgent for now and we need to see change now and we need to get emissions down now, but also because we need to look to the future and say, well, what kind of society, economy do we want to be? Can it be sustainable? Can we have, you know, good jobs for young people? Can we have good jobs for older people as well? We need to look at how do we make sure that our transition is fair and it is taking everybody with us. It doesn't leave anybody behind. So that's really crucial too, about making sure that the transition and the decisions that we make now at Scottish Government level are shaping a future society that is just and fair, but also has, you know, environmental benefits, it has economic benefits, and it has social benefits as well.